Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 11th free AI for Education webinar. My name is Tom Barrett, and I'm the host for this evening's dialogue. So this is season 3 of these sessions, and it's been great to make some space, hold some space for conversations with educators from all around the world. And it's my pleasure to be having some conversations tonight with Dr. Neil Hopkin and also Chris Buswell. And it's going to be a fascinating exploration of some of the potential and pitfalls of AI for education, a really important time for us within education. And so these sessions are an opportunity for you to elevate your AI literacy, engage in some provocations about how AI is disrupting and having an impact already on the lives of young people, and also what it potentially means for us in teaching and learning. I am going to make a start by not sharing the European Commission Education Guidelines, although those are excellent. You're very welcome to those, and we can send them out in our sort of pack afterwards. Let's start with an acknowledgement of country. So I'm on the lands of the Bunurong people here in sort of southeast Melbourne near the Mornington Peninsula. The Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, they're the traditional owners and the custodians of the land on which I'm joining you from today. And I recognise their continuing connection and stewardship of these lands, waters, communities, and learning that happens here. I pay my respects to the Indigenous elders past, present, and those who are rising. Sovereignty here has never been ceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I also extend that acknowledgement to the lands you're joining from today. We've got a great opportunity to connect and share stories, ideas, and to develop our understanding and try to work creatively to rise to the challenges of our time. So it's great to be welcoming you to our session. And I'm just going to give the opportunity to our guests just to do a quick introduction. So Dr. Neil Hopkin, welcome to the session.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to see you, and Chris too. So I am in Dubai, in an incredible and visionary country, the United Arab Emirates, who are heavily invested in artificial intelligence. So a particularly great place to be whilst we're discussing this particular topic.
Great, thank you, Neil. And Neil, I know you'll be drawing from lots of experience in international settings. Particularly interested in hearing how you're sort of seeing this from a global perspective. So I'll be looking out for that. Well, Neil, welcome. It's great to have you with us. And joining Neil is Chris Buswell. So Chris, tell us where you are and what you're up to.
Hi, Tom. Thank you very much. And thank you, Neil. And g'day to everyone out there. I'm coming from the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people. And I'd also like to acknowledge the elders, both past, present, and emerging. I was in Dubai for a few years, Neil, and I'm now back in Australia working as the head of education for STEM Punks. So I've got experience in international settings. As an educator for 16 years, I've been a passionate advocate for technology and its pitfalls, as well as the way in which it can accelerate education. So I'm really looking forward to joining the discussion today around AI literacy. And I'd also just quickly, Tom, I'd like to thank you, mate, because if we talk about AI literacy, a lot of what I've learned has come from you. Obviously, your work in the prompt craft, the newsletter, your previous blogs, and the AI for Education webinars. So big kudos. So thank you.
I accept that kudos with gratitude, Chris. So you're referencing PromptCraft. So yes, a weekly newsletter to try to curate from the fast sort of flowing torrent of developments for us as educators. So if you're not on there, I encourage you to jump on and subscribe. Before we get any further, let's just set the scene for tonight. We are running for about an hour. If you are on the YouTube link and you're on live, say hello where you are in the chat. I can already see Steve from Staffordshire in England and Michael joining from Melbourne. Leanne's joining. from Sydney, welcome, and B as well from Poland as well. Sunshine Coast is representing with Kesa. Cam's joining from Melbourne. If you're on the chat, please say hi, figure out how to add a comment, ask some questions as we're going, but most importantly, just tell us where you are in the world. The recording is going to be the same link that you've got here, so that's nice and easy. So, but there'll be some resources probably bubbling up from the session that we'll send to you once we're done this evening. And there's no need to worry about a microphone awkward breakout room because you are on YouTube Live, so you don't have to worry about that. Welcome, Jackie, and Phoenix 21. Sorry, Viv from Sydney. I should have actually read the comment rather than the user. All right, so let's talk about protocols. So how do these sessions run? This is not your usual presentations in a webinar format. This is, you know, we're striving for a conversation that is a little bit more organic. Let's just look at the boundaries of that. So we're going to be hard on the content, soft on people. So if you're offering critique in the comments, or Neil and Chris, if you're offering critique to each other, ensuring that we're kind to each other in that. But we're hard on the content, so we're asking those tough questions. Let's make sure that we know that that's expected. So if you hear me pushing back, that's coming from a place of you know, caring and love, remember? Me wanting to kind of help and support you explore different parts of the dialogue. We're going to be kind, specific, and helpful in our critique. We're also going to step up and step back. And so the left side of the set of protocols is about participation. And Chris and Neil, I really encourage you to think about your participation, how making it know that we want you to step up and share your insights and expertise. And then the last protocol at the top there is the traditional Chinese character ting for listening. And it just is a great provocation for us to think about, how are we centered on this right now? How are we giving ourselves permission to listen fully in loads of different ways? And so try to sort of dial down those other things that are happening so that you really sort of center on this work and immerse yourself in the learning that's going on. Are those protocols okay, Neil and Chris?
They seem like fabulous. Anything which is based on kindness and love sounds like a fabulous.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned, I hit those two trigger words. It's kind of like a exit row verbal agreement, and I'm not really sure what would happen if you said no anyway. You know, it's like a no. So it's what would happen, I'm not sure. But all right, we're going to get started tonight with a question that has been floated through all of the different sessions so far. And by the way, every one of these webinars is available on YouTube. And so, you know, there's 10 hours worth of free professional learning. You can dive into that. And so the question I have for you both, and Neil, I'm going to come to you first, is really about how this disruption, this technological, educational technological disruption is feeling different to you. All of us on the panel tonight have lots of experience with educational technology, and we've experienced it in lots of different ways. But I'm really curious to kind of hear from you, Neil, how does this feel different?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, if we look back over time, there are certain things that we can see as trends. And I look back, you know, I've been a school leader for 25 years now around the world, and I've seen a lot of incremental change. So I've seen that incrementally we're making progress towards goals, and sometimes, of course, you take a couple of steps back and so on. COVID was interesting in terms of disrupting things a little. But I think what happened during COVID was we discovered, although people were using technologies to support the continuation of learning, to a great extent, we all miss being together. I'm naturally a quite antisocial person. I didn't think I'd miss being with people at all. I thought it'd be absolutely brilliant. And, you know, for about 6 months it was. But actually, even someone as a hard rock as myself, still found at that point that I was missing that collegiality. And I think we discovered during that period that actually technology wasn't everything, and that humanity and interfacing was important. And so it's easy to feel that almost all technologies, even at the onset of computing and the use of the internet in schools, I can remember as a teacher in London, being given the school's one laptop. I was the custodian of the laptop and all of the joys that went with that. So even from that period onwards, everything has felt slightly incremental. However, this doesn't feel like that. And for me, the analogy is really between Usain Bolt and the Fosbury flop. You know, if you think of Usain Bolt, clearly, you know, wonderful images of him 2 or 3 meters ahead of world-class opposition, world champions, Olympic champions, 2 or 3 meters ahead, smiling, grinning, not really pumping to the line. It was clear that something extraordinary was happening, a once-in-a-lifetime thing, unprecedented, never seen it before. But actually sprinting didn't change as a result of Usain Bolt's emergence in that field. It didn't really change. Everything has gone back to where it was or incrementally progressed as normal, as opposed to the Fosbury flop. And you don't ever see any kids now doing scissor kicks over a high jump. You don't see any international athlete doing a scissor kick over a high jump. The invention of that particular way of getting over the high jump changed everything, and nothing has looked back. And to me, it feels as though this particular disruption to the technological landscape, the social landscape, and the educational landscape is like that. It's changed everything, and nothing is going to be the same. The genie, we haven't got the genie in a bottle and looking at it and wondering whether or not we should let it out because it might change. It's out, and it's changing without anyone being able to get it back in the bottle, however much we are concerned about regulation. It's already out there. So there's no looking back, whether people want to or not, whether people impose regulation or not, there'll be no looking back on that. And that, to me, seems completely different to anything that I've witnessed before within education.
Yes, and you're referencing the other aspects of our educational life, really, though, as well, in terms of disruption. It's not just within the in which the question maybe centers on technology. It is a technology that's disrupted in other places. And you mentioned, you know, how we lead, you know, how we relate to each other, you know, is pretty broad. Chris, what's resonating for what Neil's shared there, and also how would you respond to this question? You just Chris, you're just on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. I really enjoyed the contrast of the COVID slowdown that we had as humanity, and we got a chance to reconnect, and then how AI has come in after that phase and really just hit us with a big shot in the arm, I think. It's for me in schools, I mean, technology comes and goes, and so to be honest, on the other side, it hasn't felt like it came as a wave initially, and there was a lot of talk about it. There was a lot of use, but I think that's settled down. People are beginning to consider the larger implications rather than just the hype around it. And I think that's happened in other times in my career. For example, a lot of the technology that I use now that's industry standard wasn't available in schools 5-10 years ago. So the cost has rapidly come down. It's now affordable and can be equitably accessed across the world, and that allows us to really reshape the way we're training kids in schools with industry standard skills that they can then transition really quickly into industry. And I feel like AI has the same capacity. It's actually allowing students to access the world around them quicker and at an easier rate. But I think the argument that I'm sort of resonating with is that this isn't going away, and it's only going to accelerate into the future. So I guess it's the acceleration that's going to happen from now on that leaves me with a lot of questions, and it's not something that's just going to come and go as such. It has the potential to reshape the way we educate and live. So.
Yeah, I mean, so thank you, Chris. I mean, one of the things that is interesting is this idea that it's suddenly here, but I think this as a set of technologies has already been impacting our lives in different ways. And so, you know, the fact that it one of the key characteristics that we've often talked about on these webinars is that AI is ubiquitous and it's in many places already. And I think there's suddenly ChatGPT is lots of people's first experience with that, but it's already been changing the way that we interact with entertainment and information and all of these things, the way that we find our way in Google Maps. So the actual broader technology is much more mature than I think a lot of people realize. Some of the core technologies and the inventions that were created were back in sort of 2016, 17. And obviously, many decades of work up to this point. But so it's an interesting way of framing it, that it's sort of suddenly happening. Certainly the disruption we're starting to see more vividly and more, in a real way within our lives. But I think that sort of is a bit of a cloud over the top of, in fact, this has been around for a long time and it's changing things already.
Neil? I think the issue with that, Tom, is of course always perspective, isn't it? If we go into schools and ask the average teacher how aware they were of AI, it's actually pretty sudden, probably, if we look at various jurisdictions across the world, pretty sudden for the vast majority of them. And I think therein lies attention and some interest in terms of what the various agenda are of different groups that have some flesh in this game, because the truth of the matter is that education has, in many respects, been right at the tail end of innovation compared to many of the things that it's bringing in as sources of its innovation. So very often we find that we're bringing in different approaches to the use of technology in classrooms, which have existed for a long time outside of the classroom, or we're bringing in particular understandings about how to improve coaching and professional development within schools that have existed a long time outside of schools. So we're very late to the party in education very often, and there are lots of reasons about that, and for that maybe. And we've all heard the much trotted out mantra about schools were created around factory models and so on. And I wonder whether we've perhaps imbibed some of that. We've drunk the Kool-Aid of the factory model and the fact that we're always slightly slow to enter into something and exit out of something. But I think with this particular technology, it's particularly relevant. Your comment is relevant in terms of, look, it's been around for a long time, but for many in teaching, it hasn't. And so teachers are playing catch up to a certain extent. School leaders who are old fogies like me are definitely playing catch up. I've become my father, that person that I ridiculed for not being able to program the VHS recorder. Now I'm reliant on my 5-year-old to teach me how to navigate the TV. I can't seem to get it to show the things I want. But this tends to be the generation of people that are leading schools. And the world that we're talking about is moving at such a pace, and there's such a currency of the lexicon associated with this, which is quite inaccessible to those people, and yet they're in a position to be leading the implementation of those things. Yeah. But I think it still is very new, and the fact that it isn't a new technology and is something that's been percolating for a little while, in some ways is more concerning, because it means that the people that are making strategic decisions, regulatory decisions perhaps, are making those decisions on behalf of education without educators necessarily really yet fully understanding the picture. Yes. In the same way that many governments around the world don't fully understand the picture. And so the tech companies very helpfully are offering to come in and help them draw up some regulation. Well, there are going to be consequences to that. And so I think it's interesting when we're thinking about how schools and educators are responding to the technology, that we remember that for many of them, they're a long way behind in terms of not only understanding the current discussion, but actually even where it came from.
Yes, and so that train of thought makes me reflect on how this type of disruption casts a lens or creates a new perspective for us to look at the conditions for innovation within education, and whether they are in fact appropriate and contemporary. So the actual structures around our leadership and around our teachers to be able to respond and to create the right conditions for innovation, to deal with these types of moments, and I think that that's an interesting way of thinking about this provocation, this disruption. Actually, of course, there needs to be some response, but it also maybe shines a light on what the kind of infrastructure of innovation, if you like, the processes and frameworks that we have, not least the human element of that in terms of competency and awareness, but actually the environment and the culture within our education systems to be able to respond appropriately. I'm going to move us on, Chris, and I'd like you to have a think, to talk a little bit about something that we're all, I think, aligned on and interested in, is about the impact of AI on creativity. But I've got a slightly provocative question here for you, Chris, just to have a think about, just to take us out. And I've also been quite picky about the word to amplify, and I've been thinking a lot about how I frame these technologies in my workflows and the way that I'm talking quite precisely about it with others it's an amplification. But Chris, should we be using these tools to amplify our creativity?
Should we be using them? Well, I guess there's a big discussion around what it means to be creative in the first place. And as we know, the idea of creativity in schools is defined in many ways. And students and teachers will consider themselves creative and others won't. And I think there's an opportunity here to redefine the way we see the ability to express creativity in schools from an education perspective. So absolutely, I think it allows opportunities for kids to differentiate their learning. There's the idea that we can provide creativity for all ages as well. I think when we've had those discussions, Tom, about prompting and simple language, and we know that simple language is accessible to anyone, and from ages 2, 3 onwards. And if a student can provide a simple word, they could potentially use an AI tool to create something of unlimited creativity, I guess, or purpose. So the outcomes that can come from that are far greater than what that particular student could achieve with their current tools. So that idea of potentially working in collaboration with AI. There's the other side, obviously, and I think we have to be careful. The ethical side of what it means to use these tools to express creativity, and how we actually honouring the work that has done in the past that these algorithms are calling upon from the data that they've collected. So, I think we have to ensure that everything is positioned, that if a tool is used to express creativity, it's acknowledged, and that acknowledgement showcases the tool that was used, but potentially where that particular data source was come from. So if the prompt used referenced a particular artist, that would need to be included.
Yeah. And again, those frameworks for provenance and attribution, maybe we've all kind of gone through that kind of Creative Commons sort of lift and learning about how do I write a blog post and reference other people's work or use other people's photos. We're in such an interesting territory, which is very different and much more complex. And Chris, you kind of mentioned there about a couple of things I just want to focus in on. And then I'll come to you, Neil. But just that piece about we don't currently have great mechanisms for talking about attribution for something that's in a complex collaboration with AI. That's a difficult thing to do. One thing that we can do as educators is learn about these models. Like, where are they from? What's the story? Who are the people that have created them? That story, that provenance is really critical, is a critical part of our AI literacy, so that we can, if needed, we can maybe call upon that story to tell, where is this work coming from? How has this influenced this? which particular model potentially is more safety, focused than another. So that's helpful. The other thing you talk about, Chris, was something there about access. So even working with young children, working with these tools, and you shared an example with me earlier. Can you just share that again, the idea of using some prompts and working with some young students?
Yeah, I mean, so we had an activity where we got our 3 and 4-year-olds to use prompts to create a story. So we basically got them to use ChatGPT. I would type their collaborative ideas, basic simple words into ChatGPT, which created the story. We then used DALL-E 2 to illustrate the story, and within 30 minutes we had the students that had created their own book that we could package together for them. So that particular activity, it obviously takes literacy to a new place, because students have that agency to create their own miniature novel that's illustrated. But also there was a lot of critical analysis that was happening throughout, because the kids were picking up on the fact that there were subtle changes between each image that was used based on the prompts. So we're developing skills regarding the fact that at that age that there are hallucinations or there are issues with algorithms in AI that we need to consider. And I think if kids have that in their mind, that it's not a perfect art nice and early, it allows them to have that frame as they get older when using all forms of AI.
Yeah, great. And interesting to think about how it changes access for us to different forms of expression. I mean, a lot of people, I think the CTO of the Chief Technology Officer, who's now the head of AI for Microsoft, talking about like natural language will be the interface, with devices. It just will become the natural way that we ask our devices to do different things. And so I'm interested to think about that as both an opportunity to access creative expression in which has never been accessible before for some of our young people, but also maybe how language gets in the way. So maybe it becomes it's the second order effect of that emphasis, is that actually language is a barrier. Neil, what's your take on some of this? I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
I mean, thank you, Chris, for that, because I think it's really inspiring to hear educators right at the cutting edge of, here's a little child that I'm going to work on, I'm going to do this thing, and someone that's taking them to a great creative place. And for me, that's at the heart of it. People like Chris are going to be very crucial, I think, in this wave of development, because there are many voices that are playing into this. And that notion of, Chris, you said right at the beginning, that's a big question around what it means to be creative. And I think a lot of concerns in school leadership positions, at least, are around that. Let's just look at the whole debacle there was when all of this hit teachers, the teacher in the street, as it were, their consciousness in November of last year. And, oh my goodness, now I can't trust anything. And then we had all that thing about whether they were developing AI tools to detect whether AI tools had been used, and how trustworthy was any of this, and so on. And we all get embroiled in the detail of that. And I think, again, those of us that perhaps have been in the system for a long time and perhaps haven't grown with this technology, grown in that world, take a certain view. And my fear is that the view is around the status quo. I notice in the comments that a good friend of mine, Steve Hall, over there in Stafford in the UK, they said, look, the worry here is that leadership in education has a lot of catching up to do. System leaders. And we've just seen that, some of the behemoths of global education, Hattie, Hamilton, and William, have shared a paper with us that is talking about how their fear is that maybe students will become decoupled or de-educated. This is a concern for me, because I think there's such a mismatch around that kind of messaging and what we've just heard from Chris. And Chris is globally right at the forefront of the greatest teachers that we have. So if your child comes under Chris's influence or teachers that Chris influences, then all is well. But if your child doesn't, then all might not be well. And the playground of creativity that is being formed for them will be informed by other views, such as, oh, we're really worried that actually kids are now going to be cheating, and what are we going to do around exams? Or we're really worried that people are going to become lazy and become decoupled or de-educated. My concern is that actually this debate and the polarization of the debate misses a great opportunity for teaching, because I don't really see that. I understand, of course, that there are details that we're going to have to address in the immediate term, but it feels to me that the focus is on the immediacy, and whether that immediacy is from very informed positions like Chris's around how can I utilize this in learning experiences for children, or whether that immediacy is around the big players on the global regulatory and governmental side who say, how can we control the way that exams still have integrity or children remain coupled to learning? I think that the picture is being missed in terms of the opportunity to think forward. This is a forward-thinking technology, and it's happening underneath the feet of education. So it's becoming manifest beyond the boundaries of the school very rapidly. And of course, all industries are going to require young people to be able to leverage the power of AI tools. You know, I look at some of the clips that people post, and in order to get a particular product, they've got 4 or 5 apps layered up. And of course, you know, to my old mid-50s mindset, they rattle through, first I'll do it in this app, and then I transport it into that app, and then I move it into this app, and I do this, that, and the other. It's all mind-boggling. But actually, that's what industries, that's what the workplace is going to require of its employees. So actually, I think the students can remain incredibly coupled as long as schools are focusing on higher order thinking and the ability to get students to leverage tools, rather than teachers perhaps thinking, how can I cut down on my marking workload, or how can I crunch a big bit of data so that I can perhaps get school improvement plans to be AI written for me, et cetera, et cetera. Those things to me seem very immediate. And I'm concerned that the debate really isn't focusing more on that future metacognitive, higher order thinking, design thinking basis, where actually AI is simply a tool. If we don't make AI a tool, that's when I think it risks all getting out of control. But in order for it to be a tool, human intelligence has to be operating at a higher level. And that, I believe, is where the focus should be, that higher order thinking, and understanding what the humanity of our intelligence brings, which AI or synthetic intelligence, artificial intelligence, is not able to bring.
Some good threads in there we can explore. Chris, what's your immediate response to what Neil shared?
Incredibly insightful. I guess from an education perspective, I've seen the shift. 21st century skills over the last decade. We talked about the importance of skill-based education and how that'll transition. There's that big STEM agenda, and that very closely links to skills. And I think when we talk about AI and we talk about the way in which we're using it in schools, that we definitely need to think about the way in which we're teaching kids to analyze what they're doing with the tool, and how to actually manipulate, to express, use the tool to express the human voice in different ways. You touched on this idea of the regulatory body and how that drives down into schools. I think the pace in which this is moving in schools, like every day there's a new tool for me to try, for us to play with, and there's obviously a subscription attached to that tool. So there needs to be time given for teachers to slow down, for students to slow down, to learn how to use these tools, to discover how their application might play out within the classroom. And often it's the students that are ahead of the game in a lot of cases, because they're using these tools as a part of their social networks or beyond. So I think we need to take it back to empowering the teachers, empowering the students, that idea of co-agency, to understand the impact and lead up, because we can have policy that's driven down, frameworks that are brought down into schools, but to really be at the coalface and understand how this is applying and how it's changing. It's certainly not a static thing. That there needs to be some sort of coexistence between the two different sides of the body that are pulling in on schools. So yeah, Tom, I think that there's a bigger discussion around how students and our systems managers work together in this space.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating thing to think about system creativity and, again, the readiness for that, at a system level. And Steve mentioned, again, you got to change the system, not the child, from George Betts. Appreciate your comments, Steve. Thanks so much. And if there's anybody else with questions or comments, feel free to throw them into the chat. We're really interested to hear everybody's thoughts about some of these topics. I think it's interesting that we're kind of thinking about our immediate response in time, like right now. And Neil, I can see you kind of your restlessness to invest in dialogue that's much further forward than where we are right now.
What I'm interested in, Tom, is there can be a lot of talk around these things, can't there? And we're all shuffling deck chairs on a Titanic or fiddling while AI burns. And the reality is that I'm interested in how can we support teachers to provide what children need. What is it that we're wanting to do? Our vision and mission statements at Fortis Education include this sense of making change makers, nurturing change makers for tomorrow. And of course, that happens right now, doesn't it? And if the pedagogical constructs that we've got in place, if the vision for what teaching and learning is about isn't in place, in order to facilitate what these young people are going to be doing when they're 21, 25, 31, 35, then what are we doing? What is the point of school if we're not preparing children in order to be able to cope with a rapidly changing landscape? And I think, perhaps in recent times, understandably, we've been focusing a lot on environmental issues and the consideration of how we need to be ensuring that our children are much more aware than perhaps my generation were, in order to try and do something to sort out some of the wrongs of my generation and my parents' generation that we've created in the world. However, I think here we find ourselves in another situation where if we don't move quickly to prepare children for how they're going to need to use AI, then actually they're going to be entering the world not able to actually deliver. One of our viewers here, Phoenix, has said, how can higher order thinking skills be developed without lower order thinking skills? Well, I'm not necessarily sure that is the case. I don't think we should be separating those things. For me, it sits very neatly within a design thinking construct. But all of that starts with empathy, and it starts with human empathy. I can remember discussions that you and I, Tom, had years ago around this design thinking cycle, and you were trying to drill it into me, how important it was to get that notion of human empathy. And I typically, of course, I'd like to apologize for this decades later, was very cynical about the whole notion of human empathy in there. Of course, I've come to understand that it's absolutely critical. And now it turns out that, the world has caught up with your vision there, Tom. Because here's a technology that, if we're not careful and we don't understand the importance of human empathy, the technology is just going to take over. And so I think in schools, we've got to be able to get down to the nitty-gritty, less waffle, less talk. Let's actually decide what is it that teachers are going to need to be doing. And that's what gives rise to my concern. Because what we will end up doing is providing for the immediate short term, rather than necessarily planning in for what are these children going to need in 10 years. We have no idea where AI will have gone, but we do now see very clearly that in order to remain in charge of AI and not have the tail wagging the dog, then that notion of humanity is going to be critical. And that ability to empathize, that ability to actually leverage AI as tools is only going to come from the distinction between the artificial and the human. And if that doesn't get sewn into our curricula, into our pedagogy, into our teacher training and our professional development courses, if that doesn't get sewn in, this AI thing is going to spin out of control of the schools, and then the kids aren't getting what they need. And
yeah.
what we're about giving children what they need, nothing else.
Chris, a quick comment there. I mean, I do have a quick sidebar. I suddenly thought, imagine in a future subject within a curriculum, which is just called human. Imagine, like, that would be something I can imagine happening in some sort of version of our universe, right? Chris, a quick comment.
That's what happens in Philosophy for Children, Tom, just before you go to Chris. Okay, that's exactly what happened. Do you remember that you did Philosophy for Children type stuff, P for C? You did all that on a Friday afternoon. And so what happened? None of the kids did any of it from Monday until Friday lunchtime.
No, of course.
So you're absolutely right. This is what education will do. If we're not careful, what education will do is misunderstand what it must do in order to make sure that students are ready to be in control of and to leverage AI.
Yeah. Chris, any quick thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I'm thinking about what peak humanity looks like, because it seems like we're going down a course where, we're either decoupling from what it means to be a human, or, we're set on a destined course to integrate with technology, and, that idea of the transhuman. And the importance of humans in education, I don't think that's going away no matter what happens. There's more to it than just what we provide kids through technology. The human experience and educators in the way in which we can connect and provide relationships, the social and emotional well-being of students is predominantly why they want to come to schools, because they not only get this knowledge that will obviously help them, assist them, but they're provided with a safe space where they feel valued and wanted. And there may be a time where we have a technology that can provide that experience, but I think that society as a whole will protect what we have as humans, and maybe that regulatory body will ensure that potential future AI systems are designed to make sure that humans and AI are balanced effectively. Something that just quickly came to mind, I remember when I was in Dubai, there was a policy around Emiratization, and so 4% of the workforce needed to be Emiratis, and I think it's increasing every year. Are we going to get to a point where we're getting replacement of humans and AI, and we have to regulate the number of AI-assisted jobs versus the human job? And that might happen across all workplaces.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating to just sort of layer in another some emerging research about creativity, just to kind of loop back on that human capability and the amplification of human capabilities with these tools. So we're starting to see some emerging research around how good are these large language models at generating ideas. And if you've used any of these things, you'll know that there's a certain fluency about them, but there's also some signals that they're at the uniqueness and novelty that's also, so fluency and novelty are often attributes of, a creative idea that are measured within research, and they're starting to score really, really high. And some of the calculations that have been done by, and I can share the links with all of you in a follow-up, but they're sort of suggesting that if a human is using these tools, they're potentially 40 times more productive at generating ideas than just humans alone. And also they're starting to score on a separate piece of research in a really, really high, like up in the 1% kind of percentile of people, passing these tests. And so that's just again a fascinating thing to think about. Is like how could you? And I've always been I'm kind of watchful of how utility maybe gets in the way of making choices, of discernment about the bias and the other story here. So utility of 40 times more productive is something that's a very powerful message. Like, who would say no to, okay, will you use that within your workflow? But I think it potentially gets in the way of us having conversations about other things, whether that's to do with the appropriate use of these tools, whether we should use them in at all, whether we have over reliance even. I want to challenge you both with some other thinking. And so one of the things I've just been sort of tapping into is just been looking at Snapchat, and they have a My AI tool. And this has been released earlier this year, and some of you may have come across it. I'm not a Snapchat user. I'm not sure this panel is Snapchatters. I'm not sure what the language.
There's nothing snappy about me anymore.
No, there's nothing snappy. But and so they have 750 million users as a social network, and so it's pretty huge. And they have this My AI chat within Snapchat, and they released recently some data about this, and so it's been used 150 million times, or 150 million users, sorry, and there's been 10 billion conversations generated by using this AI chatbot. And I am fascinated by the spectrum of technologies here, rather than just ChatGPT, where we've been, focused. And maybe this leads into a little bit what you're talking about, Neil, is just seeing that there's this much bigger sort of shift that we have to grapple with. Because I think our conversations in education be focused on just repackaging information with chatbots. It's like on one part of that. But I think these types of technologies are also designed for companionship. And I think when you experience a chatbot that is designed for companionship rather than information, it is a very different experience. And so and by the way, this data is like back from like months ago from, Snapchat. Our young people are using these technologies, are engaging in these conversations. It is already changing the way that they have relationships with technology. My challenge to you is to think about, if our students will have more synthetic relationships than human relationships, how does the school community respond to that?
Well, I think the first thing I would say, Tom, straight out the gate is it's not just about changing their relationship with technology. It's changing their relationships with other humans. If you're getting a particular diet, if you're getting 10 billion particular meals from a diet, then that's changing what you're going to be expecting. We've seen this in other topics on the internet, haven't we? That I won't refer to, but you understand what I mean. In terms of the diet that young people are fed on changes their expectation of what happens, and that has ended up being quite destructive, I'm told, by the sociologists. And so the reality is that we could easily see that if there are a large number of conversations going on to which the responses are subject to a particular algorithm, particular emphasis, nuance, etc., that is going to lay itself open to accusations of social engineering in a way, isn't it? Because it's forming the parameters around where we think those conversations will take place. Now, that's to look at it negatively. I mean, positively, there's a huge amount of loneliness, and maybe all these dreaded devices, we're going to look back in time and say, what were we thinking of? When Steve Jobs said, today I'm going to change the way you communicate, maybe right there and then, if we could get in the time machine that AI will no doubt design for us, we'll be able to go back and say, actually, thanks, but no thanks, Steve. We're seeing what happened as a result of the way you changed we communicate. And so I think, there's a possibility that the life that many people lead now is extremely lonely. And is that a bad thing if someone is able to in some way mitigate against loneliness by having what in effect is a phantom conversation, a phantom relationship? I don't know. I mean, I think that's a thorny ethical issue, isn't it? Really, in terms of are you less lonely because you're having a synthetic conversation?
Yes.
But I think. On the other hand, there's a little bit like saying, look, I'm not going to go to the hospital to, I've got this hacking cough at the minute, and I had to give up last night and go to the doctor, and he's given me all sorts of artificial things to put in my body to try and clear it up for me. I had tried the traditional approach of saying, come on, it'll be okay, and it didn't work, and so I actually did something which was sensible. I wonder whether synthetic relationships might actually be a sensible thing for some people. But these are big topics, and I think the impact on society as a whole of making these decisions are completely unknown. And because the algorithms and the thinking that goes behind the kinds of responses the other member of that conversation may be having, because that's unknown to us, that's a bit tricky, isn't it?
Yes.
It's hard to discern what the game is without other cues that we would have in conversation. In normal human-to-human conversation, there are other cues that we instinctively and through experience learn to pick up, and we see the way they react with and engage with other people, and we start to make some judgments about whether we want to continue that relationship or not. Whereas if something's synthetic, you don't have that opportunity. You don't get to see whether there's malevolence there or benevolence, I think.
Hence the importance of provenance and attribution and appreciation for where these technologies are from. Like, what's the story behind them? How are they in our lives all of a sudden? If we don't have that information, we're far less enabled to make the most potentially of those synthetic conversations. Chris, what's your immediate thoughts about some of this exploration? Just on mute.
You see, Chris is having a synthetic conversation right now. He was just demonstrating right there. He was talking to his other partner, and now
you can feel the voice forming.
We're humans. You can talk.
I mean, every student is different, and with the idea that there's a one-size-fits-all way of having relationships in society is crazy. So I would say, Tom, that this is already happening to some degree, and for some students, it works better than the human relationship, because there could be all sorts of anxiety that goes with dealing with certain situations. The other side of it is potentially the synthetic relationship could be a leapfrog or an opportunity to learn from or learn how to deal with real human relationships, just like you might go through an AI simulator to learn how to do a job interview. There's VR resources that put you in front of avatars. And so, that sort of simulation idea where we're getting students to practice real life human interaction, I think is really, really powerful. I don't know if schools will know when more synthetic relationships are happening with humans. Like, it's something that's just going to creep in. And obviously we can control what happens within the school time. A lot of the relationship that kids would be having with technology are happening outside of school time, and that's being brought in, behind the curtains, behind the scenes, I guess, in a lot of schools. And so there has to be an awareness. We have to work with families. I think schools are very good at doing this today, like that. We create great partnerships with our community, with schools, to understand the way in which we are relating as people and with technology. And so it's all about awareness from my perspective, and not so much about an immediate response to anything. It's just reshaping the way in which we're operating to ensure that we're catering for everyone, for all learners.
Yeah, so imagine, let's just kind of play this scenario through. Imagine a student or a family join your community, and that student brings with them their AI relationships, which are part of their education plan that supports them. And that's part of their provision that maybe has helped them across the last few months, and the school potentially has to make space for that provision. Isn't that an interesting thing to think through? How those, how does that kind of meet the kind of space or the thinking and the dispositions that are within that leadership group or within that school community? And so I think there's some interesting, I think that sort of stuff is fascinating. I would like to, if it's okay with you both, we've got 5 minutes to go, to see if we can fly through some of the questions that our wonderful audience has sort of posed to us. And Leanne reminding us that Steve's shared an important question. We've got some really good ones, and I'd really like to kind of tap into some of them, if that's okay. And so let's just sort of drop this one off for a second. So we've got about 5 more minutes left, and folks, if you're still with us, fantastic. Please, drop any comments and questions in the chat. And so I'm going to kick off actually with Gilbert, who posted a question about so Hattie and William et al. Sort of framing up 13 recommendations for sort of minimizing damage. And we've also got, Chris, your kind of boots on the ground kind of experiences. What's that kind of middle ground? What's the meeting point between that? How do we bring those worlds together? Is it just going to be a messy exploration?
I think to some degree, Tom, I think it has to be.
Okay.
I think because of, as we've talked about throughout this webinar, the pace and rate in which the change is happening, and the new tools that are being introduced, there isn't going to be one framework that I think will work for the future. I think it's constantly evolving, and if there's not a meeting between all stakeholders within education to help develop these frameworks and to test them, to actually understand how it actually plays out. And I think that's what we've talked about forever in education, is like it's all great having policy, but how does it actually play out on the ground, and what are the actual impacts on our communities? So
I think to add to that, Chris, I would say you're absolutely right. It will be messy, and if we wait for the policy wonks to dictate it, the game will all be over. I think the key here is sharing. I think what you're doing here, Tom, is great. You're facilitating a conversation. Many people are engaging in it. We're hearing from people like Chris, who are just experts in this. And I think the more that we're able to share that discourse, and while separately resonate around some core principles or experiences, is important. If anyone's seen the Oppenheimer film, we hear some of the concerns there being talked about. Why aren't we sharing this technology? And that was being voiced at the time. And I think maybe we're at a similar moment in some respects, that this bomb is about to be dropped on education. If we don't share our understandings, by that I mean practitioners and school leaders, if we're not sharing that, then actually this thing will quickly wheel out of control. I don't think we can wait for policy. I don't think it's going to come top down. And I think when it does come, it won't be massively helpful. Actually, this is a grassroots movement. By grassroots, I don't just mean teachers, but I mean senior and middle leaders within schools and people who are leading groups of schools like myself. It's those kind of people which actually should be engaging through a forum like yours, Tom.
Yeah, interesting to think about the lack of educated voice in a lot of this at the moment. And and so we should be looking out for those consultations that are happening at governmental level. I know there's one in the UK at the minute. Australia's recently had some. And also, Neil, my challenge to you is how you capture your provocation and challenge, and how do you share that? Because I think, we've all got to, I think, those of us that have been originally in that group of people who were in, a space where we had new tools to publish, many years ago when we were blogging more. We had spaces where we could share our views, and I think we've got to dust those off and find ways to sort of talk about these complex things and make space for more dialogue. So I'm really want to continue to advocate for more educated voice. I don't think there's enough of that at the minute. Let's move on and just talk about Steve's question here. We're a little bit short of time, so we're going to run just a little bit over. I hope that's okay, Neil and Chris, but maybe we can just sort of have a look at this. This is an important question. So despite it being right at the end, so Steve's asking here, it's certainly not naive, no. But from someone who's conscious that we may have lost a lot of the positive influence of community, how does AI impact on Indigenous cultures? Have Western cultures something to learn? Neil, would you like to sort of start us out?
Well, I think it's interesting being based here in Dubai, which is a very visionary, forward-thinking country. And, so the Emiratis here have absolutely grasped AI by the collar and are doing some amazing work in terms of learning platforms utilizing AI. So some astonishing work that's going on. I think we're going to see a lot emerge out of the UAE. In terms of technology, they're incentivized to do it. I'm very keen to, be a global leader here. I think we're going to see that happen. So I think there probably is something to learn from that, and certainly the culture here is highly collaborative and ambitious. Not afraid to step into something that isn't fully formed yet, and to start to help to create something exciting from a governmental level, and that's what's different here. The government here is leading the measured and academic consideration of this, and I don't see that necessarily in other places where perhaps there's a slightly more sluggish response. So that is an exciting thing, but of course then how that then translates into the country beyond and and globally into those countries where there isn't that same relationship, there isn't that same attitude. I think that's problematic.
Thank you, Neil, for starting us off. I've got some thoughts, but Chris, you want to come in here with this?
Just quickly, I know we're almost finished, but thank you for your question, Steve. I think it kind of raises larger questions around equity of access to all communities, whether we're talking about Indigenous cultures or not. So ensuring that we have equal access to technologies that are developed without bias. And I think that's a bigger argument to ensure that they're representative of all communities and they are designed to ensure that they have a positive impact on that community. Tom, you're aware we've done a lot of work with the people of PNG, Papua New Guinea, through the PNG Oz partnership. And something I learned from that partnership is that Western cultures absolutely have something to learn from Indigenous cultures in regards to the way in which we use culture in education and the way in which we perceive the role of the human in the connections that we have. So AI and the human argument, once again, is at the forefront.
Yes, fantastic. Just a final comment from me on this question. I think that I've been tracking a bit of the digital sovereignty, I think is a way of describing it, in some of the models that are being created. Again, it's coming from a place of me wanting to know the story behind the technology I'm using. And so where are these things from? And where does that how does that provenance then inform me in terms of its bias, its limitations, its capabilities? And I think of us, our appreciation that other countries are developing their own large language models. So UAE have released Falcon, which is I think they have released that, for open source use, but has been generated, trained within the country. I know that UK are generating and investing heavily in their own. And obviously there's some interesting kind of tension at the moment between America and China in terms of investments in different types of chip technologies, et cetera, in terms of limiting some of that kind of growth. There's starting to form some interesting kind of boundaries and lines between these tools and where they're from. And so my point here is sort of two-sided. One, does the large language model, which is the core technology that we're often using, does that represent the communities that we're in, that that we want to serve, that we're serving, or where we are, the lands in which we are, the indigenous populations that we're in. And if it doesn't, then what choices do we have? Again, that kind of gap maybe emerges. The other side of that is that what happens when every country has their own large language model made in Australia, So what happens then when we start to make choices about a model or a technology based upon the country that it's made? And so I think and I can see that happening. I can see signals of that happening, and it's important for us, again, as educators, to recognize that's happening and to kind of see how that might play out within our schools and within our communities. I would make a reference to Steve, to some of the great work, some of the original work that I kind of picked up on from reading about this around in sort of Maori culture and within New Zealand, some great work around AI and the kind of how it represents some of those histories. I think that's a really important story to maybe look into, is the use of AI to within those cultures and to kind of support those histories. And so I'll make sure I kind of add that to the links that I'll share back with you. Okay, let me just drop this off here. So Steve, thank you for your question. I know it was a big question for right at the end, but I'm really grateful for it. And I know there's more to explore. So I'm just going to bring our session to a close. Sorry that we ran over a little bit of time here. So this has been the 11th session. I'm hoping to do one more before the end of term. So we'll see if we can squeeze out a 12th session in season 3. We'll see if we can line up a few people that are keen to get into this space. Thank you to everybody who's on the chat still, who's stuck with us, and we really appreciate your comments and your questions. It's been great to kind of have you with us. And I know if you're joining the recording later on, I appreciate your support. So Neil, any last comments? But a big thank you to you.
Well, I've enjoyed the humanity and non-synthetic nature of this connection with you. So, thanks for everybody. And thanks for everyone who is engaging in this dialogue out there, because I'm absolutely convinced that your voice is going to be key to this, and our collaborative work together through connections and through, Tom and others' brilliant work here, trying to connect us all. That's going to be the key to making sure that the future for the children is fantastic. That's what this is about. And whether it's about us being careful or whether it's about us being enthusiastic, it's actually making a bright future for the children. And Tom, I think you're enabling that brilliantly. So thank you for hosting this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Neil Hopkin. It's been great to have you. And Chris Buswell, thank you so much for making the time to join us and sharing your expertise.
Yeah, once again, thank you, Tom. And lovely to finally meet you, Neil, and learn a little bit from you today. What an exciting time to be alive and a part of the education world. So yeah, as Neil, you mentioned, these discussions are critical for people to keep up with that pace that we talked about before. So thank you to everyone out there, and have a lovely evening or morning.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'll probably be seeing you, if you're joining us for a future session, in a couple of weeks' time. Don't forget to register with Promptcraft, my weekly newsletter. And I think I'm meant to sort of say things like and subscribe this YouTube video, do all that and ring the bell and have fancy graphics and things. But maybe I'll just say cheerio. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.